Let me ask you two slightly uncomfortable questions. Is your business still talking about transformation in 2026? And are you not necessarily afraid of AI or the technology, but really the quieter question underneath it all? If the work changes, who am I then? Today's conversation goes straight to the heart of that. Because today's challenge is that transformation assumes there's a before and an after, an incremental change in our realities that we are working through. But what we really need to deal with is the speed of change of today. And for that, we need reinvention. And reinvention is continuous and personal and unavoidable for all businesses. In this episode of the Business Emergency Room, I'm joined by Nikki Barua, and we get very honest about why AI, technology, and shiny pilots won't save your business unless leaders are willing to rethink identity, value, and how work actually gets done.
Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're back with me this week because I have a fabulous guest. The challenge today is for us to gonna try and keep it in 25 minutes because I think we could do, multiples of 2.5 hours easily before we're done. Today, we are going to talk about reinvention. Exciting subject. My guest today is Nikki Barua, and she is a serial entrepreneur. She's a keynote speaker. She's a best-selling author. And most importantly, she's a globally recognized expert on transformation. She is the CEO and co-founder of Flipwork, the human and agentic system for workforce reinvention. And she has been working in this space for well over a couple of decades. Mm-hmm. It's clear that we have worked and lived in some of the same places, so that builds extra connections too, right? We're sharing India and Pittsburgh of all places. Nikki also alluded to the fact that she worked casino integrations and mergers and actually was in New Orleans way before Katrina. But the whole subject of casino integration sounds interesting enough. You've been recognized and have loads of accolades and awards behind your name. We could talk about that also a long time. I just really want to talk to you about reinvention. I'm so excited you're here. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited because you and I have spent so much of our career in business emergency rooms, literally.
Yes.
All of the rescue projects and the cleanup after the messes. And it provides so much perspective and wisdom, not just on difficult times, but also in the peace times of how to navigate and lead.
Yeah, for sure. And we were talking briefly before about the pit, right? Which is the moment is bringing in all the awards in the award season as a series about a emergency room in Pittsburgh, close to where we both spent a significant time. So maybe that's not entirely a coincidence, right? Maybe there's something in the water in all this meant to be. Nikki, to paint a little bit the landscape before we go into reinvention versus transformation, can you give us some examples for us to kind of paint the mental picture? What are the kind of clients you work with and what kind of reinventions are we talking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, most of my career has been focused on helping really world-leading companies, the Fortune 500, the Fortune 100 companies, where the challenge isn't lack of resources or talent, because these are mega brands that have lots of people all around the world. They have some of the smartest talent and tons of capital. Their challenge is speed. And I always said I'm in the business of making elephants run. How do you help really big companies gain momentum? Because even small improvements can lead to increased momentum, right? It's when you consider mass and velocity, they have the mass. They just need a little bit of velocity. And having worked with these kind of companies for over 25 years, and leading transformation to see how they transform their business, their technology, their cultures, and all of that. What is different that I'm seeing today is that you cannot afford to have transformation that is episodic or just touching one aspect of your business or organization. What is happening today is literally hacking the company from the top down, inside out. And that's a very big risk and a really big leadership challenge. And that's where I see, if that is true for the largest companies, it's equally true for small and medium businesses, but the largest ones are truly facing time pressure of being able to do that at the speed of AI.
Yeah, so let's get into then the conversation around reinvention versus transformation, right? Transformation in itself seems to be somewhat negative word to many. Reinvention sounds way more upbeat, constructive, and positive.
Yeah.
Yet also much more impossible, I would say, to many. Or I think that's if we think about how are these words used, you purposely use reinvention as a sign of the times, very much so. Can you talk a little bit about how much further and different reinvention goes than transformation?
Let's describe it more from the perspective of an individual before we talk about the implications for a company or a business. When you think about a person transforming, it's almost like you gain a new skill or you sort of have some aspect of yourself adapt. And it can be episodic. There's a start and end date to that transformation. It's like going to college, right? You go in as a high school kid, you come out of college transformed because there's some new experiences and new perspective that you gain, and that sets you up for the future. Reinvention hits on something way deeper. It's about an identity shift. And when we really think about what requires that identity shift, it's because when we have a certain formula for success, for the things that we believe in, our values, our belief systems, our behaviors, our mindset, our identity gets calcified around that. And so reinvention becomes necessary when no amount of, superficial skill or experience is enough to let go of the previous identity and embrace something new. So the identity shift and the reinvention really is more about the unlearning part and the letting go part that is so critical and therefore the most threatening. And just like for an individual, if you're reinventing your career or reinventing who you are and what you believe in, how you show up in the world, it's one thing to learn something, it's another to unlearn and really transform from the inside out. And once you shift your mindset and your beliefs about who you are, that shifts what you do, how you do it, how you show up in the world and the value you create. And the same exact thing applies to businesses as well. Blockbuster could not have become a Netflix just by deploying more digital transformation. That is not what it would have allowed it to succeed. For Blockbuster to become Netflix, it required reinvention, and that's what did not happen. So any superficial application of technology or automation or efficiencies don't lead to that. And the challenge that companies are facing today is that basic change management and simply getting AI licenses or hoping that their new pilots or getting vendors and consultants coming in and advising them, it has very superficial impact. What is truly required is leadership courage, frankly, to have a vision of what your company can be, how you show up as a business in the future, and how you get from where you are to where you want to be. And that's the reinvention path.
And so can we go back a little bit to the why of it, right? Because I could almost hear some of our listeners thinking, yes, we're not all Blockbuster, right?
Yeah.
I think historically, much of the change and transformation businesses have made has also been self-chosen, right? Mm-hmm. And if I'm understanding you correctly, you're kind of saying that this reinvention is going to come for all of us, not as individuals, but as maybe also as individuals in those businesses for sure. But but that the way the world is operating and the speed at which things are changing, that every business is going to run into this situation where their current identity and what it is they do and who they serve is going to have to shift drastically, because whatever it is that makes them who they are today and makes them successful today will diminish and or cease to exist in that form. Is that a fair interpretation?
Absolutely. At its core, what we're witnessing at a speed and scale that we've never seen before is a true erosion of your competitive moat. When you look throughout modern history, we've had lots of tech disruptions happen over the last, few decades. And each time companies and businesses have adapted to them. And the ones that adapted better got disproportionate returns from that. But when you consider the speed of that disruptive cycle, look at the dot-com boom. The internet boom was like, we had 20, 30 years for companies to really adapt to that. Because even if you did not have mass adoption, you could still survive, with your brick and mortar business or what have you. There was a lot of time to adapt to that. The mobile cycle that came about, the cloud cycle, each of those, there was a much greater grace period, if you will, for companies to get on board. And that afforded companies to go through a systematic transformation program and to be thoughtful and even for their culture to have the capacity to absorb that level of change. What we're seeing today is change happening within weeks, not years. It's happening within weeks. That is biologically impossible for human beings to adapt to that speed of change. And so you're talking about a company culture where everybody in your company is dealing with such a rapid pace of change that the most normal reaction ends up being inertia. Because everything's changing so fast that you keep spinning in the same circle. And at the end, you realize you haven't moved an inch because you literally don't know which direction to go. And when you're stuck in that inertia, that disruptive cycle is moving so fast and affecting so many parts of your business that you are left with almost no mode. Anything that gave you an advantage before, whether it was product innovation, whether it was distribution, whether it was customer experience, all of those things are evolving at a speed that you can't even keep up. So there's two aspects for every company, and most importantly for leaders to be thinking about is, where do you focus? Instead of just being in inertia, pick a lane, any lane, but, figure out where to get started. That starts to build that momentum internally. And then secondly, really identify in your reinvention plan, what should your new mode be?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, because there's been many businesses that are kind of, when they look at technology, right, say, hey, we'll be in the quick adapter, right? The core of our business is not technology. We'll be a quick follower. The challenge is, if you try to, being a quick follower needs to be a real quick follower, right? The pace at which you could still be a quick follower is tomorrow, right? If the leader is today, then you being quick follower means tomorrow. So that's already fundamentally different. But if that's what you're doing, you're not necessarily changing your identity, because it's very likely then that you are choosing to follow or deploy and trying to force fit it to what you are already doing, right?
Exactly. And I do see that reaction from companies where they've historically not been the first movers. Culturally, that is not their approach. It's very strategic and thoughtful and sort of deliberate in how they show up in the market. And that same approach is what they end up applying even now. The challenge is what we're witnessing today is a little bit of a winner takes all situation. And you see this in in all the tech players, right? It has become a winner takes all kind of situation. Now, it might change all the time. Look at NVIDIA. I mean, they dominated the AI chip market. And now the very same company is threatened because there's other ones coming up with faster, better chips. So even the dominant players don't hold on to their monopolistic dominance for long, because those competitive cycles are also changing.
Yeah, speed up.
Yeah. But at the same time, speed alone isn't enough either, because if everybody is 100x faster, because we all have access to the same infinite intelligence, well, speed stops being an advantage. So the question is, where does the real advantage come from? And that is what I mean about reinvention. You cannot just compete looking at your competition and saying, oh, well, as long as we're one step behind them, we'll still be safe. It really requires inner reflection and discovery to say, who might you become in this new age? What is the essence of your culture and your company that actually provides you a unique value in this new world? And then what are the parts you shed? What are the parts you let go of? Where do you leverage your people to become an agentic enterprise where humans and machines collaborate? And what does that really look like for your business? And the answer is going to be different for every company. So
if I'm knowing how you work and what you advocate for, right? So my understanding is that if we talk about reinvention and we're talking about the technology and following that, what you're really saying is the technology or the tools, let's call it more the tools than the technology, are really third. First is that realization that you need a whole identity shift. Then second, it's about the execution of that. Can we talk more about that?
Yeah, what we're seeing and what we have been seeing for the last 18 months in particular is the shiny object syndrome, where executives are getting pressure from their boards to say, hey, what's our plan with AI? How are we leveraging AI in the business? And, their teams are looking for clarity and direction. And the reaction that we see is, here's a vendor that pitched an AI tool. Let's buy the licenses. And then we can say we've deployed technology in the business. The result of that is that you see a lot of failed pilots because it's technology deployed without purpose, without clarity of the vision for the future, without the results that you want. And then it leads to disillusionment that maybe this thing isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Maybe there's, not that much value add to it and it's still experimental. The reality is that...
Yeah, so we're actually AI-ifying the autopilot, right?
Exactly, because
you're... mundane, day-to-day, as it happens today.
Yeah, because if you deploy revolutionary tools in old ways of working, you're not going to get great results. That's like taking a Lamborghini engine and sticking it on a horse carriage. You're still limited by the horse. You're not going to get any faster than that. So that's the whole point, is you're starting from the wrong end. And the path to reinvention begins with the people aspect. You have to really think about, how do you unlock human potential by getting your people to think differently, to change their behaviors and their mindsets, to recognize how they can double down on what makes them uniquely valuable, the parts that machines cannot do. Maybe, and those are the things that are, your innately human skills, right? The wisdom, the judgment, the discernment, the creativity, the relationship skills, all of those things. How do you move 80% of any individual's capacity into those kind of things? And then leverage AI and tools to do the things that machines will always do better, faster, and cheaper than humans can. When you start with identity shift at that level, because there's resistance to that, and it, one of the examples that I can share from recent work we did with a very large company was discovering that some of the resistance wasn't even about the technology. The resistance actually came down to a mismatch of core values. And here was an individual in a senior position that said, look, my entire career, my value has come from hard work. I was first in, last out. I put in a lot of hours, and that's what helped me be successful as a leader and rise up in my career. When I use AI, I feel like I'm cheating because it gets done in minutes. So there was resistance, and it had nothing to do with technology. It was because value, this person's personal core values, were being defined on effort. That's an identity shift. How do you shift your, values from effort to impact? And you have to do that for every individual in your company and rewire teams of how they think and what they're willing to let go of. And when you can shift at that people level, then you start looking at how do you shift how you operate and your workflows and your processes and all of that. And when you redesign those, only then are you truly ready to introduce agentic tools into the mix.
What I'm really hearing is that the real fundamental shift that needs to happen and is permanent is that so many of us associate who we are professionally with what we spend our time on during the day, right? It's our brain, our neurological networks have short-circuited it but that is 80% of my day. So if I don't have that, then who am I, right?
Yeah.
The ego in our brain struggles to process that.
Who am I? And also, how do I feel if I let go of it? What do I reallocate that time to?
Do I have value?
Right.
Yeah.
One of the teams we work with, we were able to release almost 60% of the overall team's capacity. Not that significant. You think about a large size team, 60% new capacity got unlocked. That effectively means you could double the output of what this team does without adding one single headcount. Now, do that at a, company with 50,000 employees. That's like having the output of a 100,000 person company without adding any new jobs in there. No. That capacity gets released, but the resistance then was, well, does this mean we're going to lose our jobs because you don't need us? Versus thinking, how do I reallocate my time to something that's higher value that actually leads to more complex problem solving?
And actually, intriguingly enough, that's not actually a new concept at all, right? Because if you look at all the research that looks at delegation, there is stuff that's a couple decades old that shows you that most leaders, it's mainly been investigated in the leadership context, right? And if you don't have anybody to delegate to, it's hard to measure, but most leaders should be able to delegate up to 40% of their work, right? So the research shows that we hold on to work that isn't ours and shouldn't. So this is a natural tendency. But where I was going with my comment also is that if we go through that transformation, if we are, it feels like the biggest piece to work with our people through that transformation, because what I'm hearing is that reinvention is going to be cyclical, right? It's becoming
continuous.
Never-ending process, and in order to create business resilience and people who can work and operate in this new normal, we're gonna have to figure out a way to get through that challenge. The challenge where what we do on a day-to-day basis will continue to change, and that's okay.
Yeah. If I had to identify one single attribute of people in a company that will help that company be adaptable to any kind of disruptive change, it's their speed of unlearning and learning. That's it. Because you cannot gain mastery in anything anymore. There's just too much out there for anyone to say, oh, I got certified in Oracle. Now I know Oracle, right? Like, it's changing so fast that you can't gain mastery. You almost need this just-in-time learning. So the meta skill is really the skill of learning. But you can't really master the skill of learning unless you're willing to unlearn and let go. And so the adaptability really comes from that attribute of people that are willing to shed their identity, their behaviors, their mindsets, their autopilot ways, and how quickly they detect that, how quickly they let go and go on. And let's take the example of, let's say, a marketing department of a company. If you look at the amount of innovation, particularly AI-led, that has happened in marketing over the last 12 months, it's mind-boggling. I mean, from copywriting to campaign creation to, to even video and images and all of that. If you had a large marketing team and you're still doing things the old way, where you're doing market research the old way, you're coming up with concepts the old way, execution the old way, you're not only getting left behind, but that speed of innovation is not slowing down. It's actually accelerating. So whatever you master, let's say in Q1 of 2026, guess what? 6 months from now, whatever you mastered now is also getting replaced. So that continuous reinvention isn't about mastery. It's having a vision for keeping an eye on where, the world is headed and being able to embrace that and incorporate that very quickly, which is not just about the individual behavioral part, but it's also the workflows and the processes of how you ingest that change and deploy that change, and then you leverage the tools quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's people who listen to this who really feel this very heavily, right? In struggle with that is what's coming, right? That you're saying subject matter expertise or more mastery, because it's maybe not necessarily subject matter expertise, although even that looks different. I'm a generalist, so I welcome that, mastery in anything is not necessarily what's realistic. At the same time, I work with a lot of specialists, right? Deep industry specialists. And to me, it feels like anybody who's making a career switch and stuff, right? I think there is also a fair amount of lost in translation and helping people see that they might have actually been learning and relearning and perpetually learning, but just in a very narrow discipline. And so they do have these skills. It's about awareness and playing that out. I don't feel necessarily, there's people who feel quite hopeless about this, right? About the replacement and about, does this mean that the way I am or the way I function, I'm going to struggle so much harder in the new world than I'm doing in this one because of this? I think some people might need a little bit more help, but I do think as humans all have a skill set that's actually translatable to that new world, right? But it sounds like a journey that needs help and guidance, and admitting that it's going to be messy and hard, but needed is step one, huh?
Absolutely. A couple comments about that. One is we historically have seen specialists being, more valued in some ways because there's a depth and mastery in a very narrow niche that they bring to the table. What is changing that I'm seeing is that generalists interestingly have a better advantage in this AI age, and the reason for that is any specialized knowledge now is competing with the machine, but the ability to connect dots and see patterns across intersectionalities across very diverse subjects and be able to see things that is only coming from your perspective, because the dots you connect based on the worldview and the experience you have is going to be different from the dots I connect. So there's a uniqueness to that perspective that is only born out of a lived experience. And so being able to present that, it represents your unique taste, your unique perspective, and your unique point of view, that becomes more valuable than just the depth and mastery of specialized knowledge. But that does not mean specialized experts become irrelevant. What it means is that they have to rise above to developing unique perspective that is born out of that depth, rather than just the expertise and leading with just the subject matter mastery.
Yeah, and even on if you're subject matter expert mastery, it's gonna take some of those people to also help figure out where the computers still create nonsense, right? Or where, because we prompted and programmed it a certain way, the logic is giving us the complete wrong. We're not all, any knowledge or skills we have is not becoming obsolete if we continue to grow with it. Nikki, you are in this space. I'm pretty sure after listening today, there's some people who are like, okay, I need to know more about this. I need more information. Where do they go? What do they do to find you?
Well, love to connect on LinkedIn with anyone, and on my personal website, nikkibarua.com. If you're curious about how to lead reinvention within your organization or for your company, go to flipwork.ai, where we also provide weekly intelligence brief for leaders that helps them figure out, what are the right strategies and the playbooks that will help them navigate through this change. But from my perspective, I think we're living in one of the most exciting times in modern human history. And this is an opportunity for leaders to really leverage everything we've learned and mastered in the past, but show up into the future with curiosity and courage, and with that rookie mindset, because there's a lot of change happening, and the only way to go into that is with an open mind and the belief that ultimately the greatest technology on planet Earth is still the human being.
Yeah, I hope that people listening today are feeling some of our excitement about it, and that we managed to convey what we believe is total doability.
Yeah.
Bring in some people like us to maybe help you along the way. If you are listening to this whilst you're driving, it's Nikki with 2 Ks, and the last name Barua is Barua. It was flipwork.ai. If you, wherever you're picking up this podcast, it will also all be in the show notes. So yeah, Nikki, thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. I hope to have you back here for our next episode. And that's actually also for you, Nikki. I hope you come back in the future to talk some more.
Thank you for having me. It was such a delight.
That's it for this episode of the Business Emergency Room. If you are currently dealing with chaos or disruption in your business, please reach out. You can email, text, or call, and I will find a way to connect with you within 24 hours. I've helped others steer out of the storm, and I know I can help you too. Talk soon. Please like, subscribe, and share.